News project. Our topic was regional economic integration, and the specific topic we chose was the recent meeting Wang Yi had with various foreign powers. We are Team 6 or Team Omada. The team members on this team are Chris Walder, Jonathan Colon, Laura Whitty, and Gino Vlacic. As I said on the last slide, we chose to discuss Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, and his recent trip to Russia, where he met with Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Russia. We will also discuss the trip Wang Yi took to Malta, Italy, to meet with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Like I said previously, we chose two articles that discuss the trip from Wang Yi to Russia to meet with Sergei Lavrov and to Malta, Italy to meet with Jake Sullivan. These meetings were an effort from China to better their relation with Russia in preparation for Vladimir Putin's upcoming visit to China. Along with discussing national security concerns and their plan for the Ukraine war and the steps they plan on taking to make it end. The meeting he had with the White House rep Jake Sullivan came shortly after the Chinese spy balloon incident in May. These articles tie into our assigned topic of regional economic integration because with these three countries being top economies in the world, if the relation between the three get better and the governments can kind of get along and work with each other, the economies can thrive off each other and help boost each other, which would be great for all three countries and the world economy. And these events are significant because we need to monitor the relationship that these two are making, considering that our current status was described as a work in progress with both countries. These topics will all be discussed further in this slideshow.
Our group chose this topic because it's very easy to be interested in. Regional economic integration affects many different aspects of our economy as well as the global economy. A lot of things are intertwined whether we realize it or not. And when you have two countries such as China and Russia involved, it becomes very interesting because obviously currently Russia's involved in a war with Ukraine. China is having strained relations with the United States, and they're pushing the United States on issues such as Taiwan's independence. China's aggression in that regard, it really piqued our interest, as China and Russia strengthening their relations can have adverse effects on the regional economic integration of other countries in that area. And it's very important that the United States monitors this, because whether we realize it or not, like I previously said, anything that happens in that region can negatively affect our economy, as China is very involved in our economy. They manufacture a lot of our goods, and strengthening relations with them involving another world superpower, if you want to call it Russia, could definitely impact our economy. It could sway away resources from our economy, attention, and it could almost put us in a backseat depending upon how we handle these relations with China. So once we get past our interest into the topic and how, all these things can affect our way of life, you get into the first article, the BBC article, which primarily focuses on Foreign Minister Wang Yi's 4-day trip to Russia, which he had right after he met with White House officials in Malta. And in this meeting, it was essentially a preliminary meeting laying the groundwork for Putin's highly speculated and anticipated visit to Beijing in October. They did also speak about other issues, such as their security relations, different security weaknesses. They touched on the war in Ukraine, and they did also talk about future military cooperation between the two nations. And it really does seem like they're bolstering their relations, China and Russia together, which can have very big adverse effects for the United States, like I already mentioned. China essentially shut off all military communication channels with the United States, which are now being discussed about potentially being reopened, at least a few of them. So that would be steps forward and progress on that front, but it is seen almost by some United States politicians and just regular members of society that we are making too many concessions to China while they're not returning any kind of favor. Like I briefly touched on, the weather balloon that was surveilling the United States. General Milley has tried stating that after the intelligence community assessed everything, they felt that it was not collecting any type of intelligence on the United States. And while that may be comforting to some, it has to be remembered that 150 former U.S. intelligence members signed off on a document stating that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation when that was known to be untrue, which we now know as well. So everything has to be taken with a grain of salt when it comes to our intelligence community. But furthermore, once you get past that, some critics and some spectators, such as Zhu Wenbu, who is the dean of the Institute of International Affairs, claims that the United States is on the right path with China. It's a work in progress, but he does feel like we are on the right path. While we do need to try and keep relations with China good for our own benefit of our economy, it is important that we hold our country's values true as well, especially in regards to Taiwan. It was one of the United States officials' biggest demands when we last spoke with China and had those conversations, while China described it as a red line that cannot be crossed by the United States. Additionally, China presented a 12-point plan to try and end the war in Ukraine through ceasefire and peace talks. And that is also a step forward, that China is trying to end the war as well as other members in the United States government, even though Ukraine may be the one not fully willing at the moment, given that they were the ones invaded. A lot of countries around the world, especially the United States, are trying to put an end to this war and stop Ukrainians and Russians both from dying needlessly, and trying to get back to global peace and stability.
Wall Street Journal article focused heavily on the meetings between Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, both of which are depicted on the left. The unannounced discussions occurred in Malta, Italy, and lasted for 12 hours. The series of meetings was stated to be a follow-up to a previous meeting in February related to the surveillance balloon incident just 8 months ago. The first half of the article brought much attention to relations between the United States and China, with it also stating that the current Biden administration is, quote, continuing to engage with China despite domestic pushbacks. However, the other aspect of the Wall Street Journal article was based on a meeting between Russian and Chinese diplomats continuing to push for coordination between the two nations. The two diplomats stated previously was the Russian top diplomat Sergei Lavrov, depicted on the left, and once again Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The main goal of the meeting between these two diplomats had various aspects to it, with the main point being ways to further cooperation between Russia and China. Some other topics discussed within this meeting was the ongoing Ukraine war and how it should be resolved with Russia's participation, as well as preparations that are currently being put in place for Vladimir Putin's visit to China. Lastly, the Russian diplomat Sergei Lavrov had inquired about meetings between Minister Wang Yi and the White House representative Jake Sullivan. However, not much was noted on this meeting from Minister Wang Yi, where he simply referred to it as negotiations. When it comes to comparing both articles, it is important to discern any differences among them. The main aspect of difference comes from the focal points of the two articles. The BBC article primarily covers the meeting between Sergei Lavrov and Wang Yi, while the Wall Street Journal splits its coverage between that meeting and the one between Jake Sullivan and Wang Yi. Furthermore, the BBC article acknowledges the meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and the North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un and their current arms deal. Yet, when considering how both of the articles relate to each other and to regional economic integration, it's important to consider the region in question, those of which being the regions of Eastern and Northern Asia, as well as some of Eastern Europe. Within that region, there have been multiple political meetings between nations such as China and Russia, Russia and North Korea, and China and Saudi Arabia. These political discussions are soon to be leading towards further cooperation to the stated nations, with North Korea and Russia engaging in discussions of trade and sale of weaponry. In more detail of the articles, the perspectives they provide discuss the implications of Russia and China's continuing cooperation, as well as the plans around finding a way to settle the Ukrainian war, with China and Russia specifically trying to find a way to avoid the notion of blame in this scenario. With the channel of communication and cooperation put in place between all these nations, it is assumed that further negotiations of such caliber would potentially lead towards regional economic integration.
The Wall Street Journal relates to the course on a variety of different aspects. It ties into Chapter 9's topic, regional economic integration. Both sides noted that they intend to expand high-level engagement in the coming months, with China's readout saying that the U.S. and China had agreed to hold bilateral consultations on Asia-Pacific affairs, maritime affairs, and foreign policy. This chapter also relates to trade and global security, which is a large topic of discussion in this article. There is a growing strategic relationship between China and Russia due to the timing of Wang's back-to-back meetings and the discussions of assistance that they are having. This journal also ties into Chapter 3 as it focuses on traveling and communication among leaders and how it puts them in a global spotlight within the media. The BBC article relates to Chapter 9 as well, regional economic integration. It covers some of the deals that are being made, for example, the arms deal between Putin and Kim Jong-un that recently occurred. It also talks about Wang Ti's 4-day trip to Russia and what that consisted of. The photo on the left is during his recent visit. This article also covers China's increased purchase of Russian energy exports, as well as their plan to end the war in Ukraine. It also mentions some upcoming travel and lays the groundwork for Putin's anticipated visit to China this upcoming October. Tying into Chapter 5, the strategic security consultations are discussed during Mr. Wang's visit. There are also many discussions of alliances and connections countries are building and strengthening. One of the key takeaways from reading these articles was understanding how complex international travel for leaders is and reading about many of the aspects that go into it. It is a very secure and thought-out process that involves a lot of media coverage. Another takeaway was the lasting effects of an economic crisis such as COVID-19 and how it put such a pause on international communication and business travel. This is starting to get back to normal among leaders this year. We were also able to read about some real-time traditions and cultural practices of other countries and the leaders within them. There are some practices or offerings that are considered a sign of respect upon the arrival of leaders that we were able to read about. The final takeaway was regarding the overall international relationships between a variety of countries. These articles both covered the growing relationships between countries and their vows to have stronger military and communication coordinations. These relationships are becoming more open and connected as countries are opening up since the pandemic as well.